Hello, Booktube. So today I'm back with a slightly more laid back video. It's going to be a little bit more discursive today, I think. So this is a Booktube tag that's been going around, and I forget the original creator of this tag, but I will leave them in the description. But I was tagged by James, whose channel, Quaint and Curious Volumes, I really enjoy. I was actually quite excited to be mentioned by him because although I discovered his channel quite recently, I really have been enjoying his videos. So thanks, James. So the topic of this tag is sort of around the virtues of rereading, and the question is really about whether to reread or whether to not. That sort of seems to be the central point of debate that this tag is getting at. So I want to take perhaps a slightly different approach to this and group some of the questions together, because to me the first four questions seem very much to be interlinked and intertwined, and I'll get into why. But basically the first four questions are about whether you reread fiction and nonfiction, why and why not, and what kind of fiction and nonfiction do you gravitate towards if you are rereading. So do you prefer to reread more like genre books or classics, or in nonfiction, philosophy, essays, what have you? Maybe I have a slightly different stance in that I think there is no reading without rereading. And I'll explain what I mean by that. There are different ways to experience reading. You can really skim through something, or you can really spend a lot of time and close read something with the intention to analyze the text, right? So I think rereading similarly comes in different forms. There is the sort of comfort read that you do from cover to cover, and that can be very similar to skim reading, where you're just going through the entire kind of thing and absorbing the overarching structure of it. But then there's a kind of very close rereading, which is very intentional and focused on certain aspects of the book that you're reading, right? So an example is, something that I have reread multiple times is the complete sonnets of Shakespeare, right? And then let's say after I have read through the sonnets, I pick up like this book of literary criticism and find an essay that discusses Shakespeare sonnets, and it gives me sort of a new light through which to understand Shakespeare. And then I'll go back and reread that because to me it almost does not make sense not to reread it. The way I kind of think about it is, if you were looking at a landscape through a lens, let's say, and you're really stunned by how beautiful it is, but then you go away and somebody hands you a lens that you realize is a lot sharper, and like when you look through that lens, everything looks like just more HD and sharper, then wouldn't you want to go back to that landscape and see what it looks like now with this new lens that you've got? So I really think of rereading in that way as well, because, we often talk about the act of reading as being this kind of dance between the writer and the reader. So to go back to my Shakespeare example, if you read a poem by Shakespeare, the writer Shakespeare and you, the reader, are forming an idea together, and it's all happening in your mind. But then you introduce a third thinker into that equation, and suddenly you've got a third consciousness, a third stream of thought that enters that process of creating the meaning of that primary text that you've read, right? So that's a really big part of rereading for me. So in terms of that cover to cover comfort read, I would say I don't do that as often. There are a few books that I can say I have reread from cover to cover. And I think the reason behind those rereads are quite trivial almost. Maybe I just want to re-immerse myself in feeling a certain way, A good example for me is Jane Eyre, which I reread from cover to cover in my 20s because I almost wanted to remind myself of what it felt like to read when I was 14, And obviously my experience of Jane Eyre was a lot more different when I reread it at 22, because, the way that I viewed the situation she was in and my feelings towards Rochester were very different compared to when I was 14, you know. Um, so yeah, so I think those kind of rereads are a bit more trivial for me, but those are just for pure personal sort of enjoyment, and just to compare how I felt now versus then. And there are a lot of books that I want to do that with. So Middlemarch, for example, is a book that I really want to reread when I'm a lot older, perhaps when I'm in my 30s or my 40s, because I really want to see how I respond to that later. So, but those are more personal reasons. And then when it comes to the other kind of more intentional rereading, I would say most classics I have done that with. Any book that I've read some criticism on that exists outside of the text, I will go back and reread certain sections, or even if it's like a skimming sort of a reread, like I've explained, I will want to experience that again with the new lens that I've gotten from the criticism. The main kind of nonfiction, I would say, is more sort of literary criticism. And, you know, sometimes history books, I will look at certain things again. But for me, there's a dance that exists between the fiction I read and the nonfiction I read. And I can't really think of one without the other, if that makes sense. A really fun kind of contemporary example of this is when I was younger, I read this short story collection, Brief Interviews with Hideous Men by David Foster Wallace. Then like a year or two later, I realized that Zadie Smith had written in an essay collection this really analytical piece on the book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go back and reread that short story collection. There's this really famous essay called The Ecstasy of Influence. The author kind of talks about how every work carries like this indebtedness to everything that the artist or the writer has absorbed from the world, right, or from other works. And he starts off with this quote by John Donne that all mankind is of one author and is one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. And what I'm trying to get at here is that I think rereading is the process of unearthing that, because every time you go and find something that author might have read as well, and you come back to their work, you're able to spot those influences. So those are maybe some rambly thoughts that I have about just the topic of rereading. There are a few more questions here as well. You know, there's a question about whether you would reread different translations of the same work. And so given my stance on the purpose of rereading, you know, that would be very much a yes. Similarly, there's a question about, you know, how many times would you reread the same book? I would say there isn't really a true limit to that when you have that sort of view on rereading, I think. And the final question is, what's the most recent book you have reread? And so if you're talking about cover to cover, that would be Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. So that was more of a comfort read, I think, and I wanted to do that for a video that I made. So, and apart from that, I've already mentioned Shakespeare's sonnets. I don't even know how many times I've read these sonnets. And of course, the final kind of prompt is to tag others. And you know, I hesitate really to tag people because I'm still quite a new channel, and I feel like I don't know a lot of people on Booktube or like in the community yet. But there are a few friends or a few people that I have come to interact with on Booktube who sometimes comment on my videos, and I really enjoy their videos as well. So I'll go and check first whether some of those people have already done this tag, but if they haven't, I will mention them in the description. I have a few in mind. I started this channel because I don't really have a lot of people in my life around me who are into literature and who like to read, just because of where I'm living right now. But I feel immediately like so welcome in this community, and I'm just really grateful for those of you who interact with my videos and like comment and stuff, and I really enjoy some of your videos as well. So genuinely thank you, and to those of you who comment who don't make your own videos either, you know, I would love to know your thoughts on rereading as well. Let me know what you think of any of the points that I've raised in the comments. and I will be back very soon.